Without any further ado, we'll get going. The invocation will be given by Father Frank Murphy, who's the new faculty chaplain. Father Murphy was a chaplain at the University of Portland before Notre Dame. Before that, spent 18 years working in Holy Cross missions in East Africa, notably Kenya and Uganda. Before that, ran a Jesuit retreat center in Ontario, Canada for 2 years. So I think he is qualified to give our invocation. And then I give it to the back of the
Can I turn this around?
Let us pray. Good and gracious God, as we gather here at the end of this semester, we give you thanks for your many blessings. We thank you for the privilege to help form minds and hearts of young people, to collaborate with gifted colleagues, and the freedom to use the gifts and talents you have given us for the common good of all. We thank you for the opportunities to increase knowledge, to make new friends and network across disciplines, to care about and walk with colleagues who are ill or suffering, and to make the world a better place by our loving concern for our neighbor, our community, and our planet. As we move through this Advent season of patient waiting and hope for the ways in which you will incarnate yourself in our lives and in this world in the new year, we ask you to bless our families, our friends, our colleagues, our students during the coming break, that we may make time for rest and renewal, for friendship and community, and so to be ready for the creative challenges of the new semester. Bless also the weaknesses and sometimes messiness in our lives, that we may see these too as avenues where your loving mercy and creative presence can be found. We especially commend to you those in our community among the faculty and staff who are ill or grieving, stressed, or suffering in any way. Deepen and bless, we ask, dear God, our ability to accept and respect the diversity you have created in each one of us and through which you incarnate yourself in the world today. And when our societies disrespect what you have created through hate or racism or ridicule, expand our hearts with your love so that we do not lose hope, but rather reach out in compassion. For you love all things that are, and loathe nothing that you have made. As we look to the future, bless our hopes and dreams to make a world better, and even in the simplest ways to do so. As we join with women and men of goodwill everywhere in our efforts to form communities of the coming kingdom. And lastly, gracious God, bless and send your Spirit upon this gathering here. And we ask all this through Christ our Lord.
Amen. Thank you, Father. This is one of my favorite days of the year because today we honor perhaps our most important activity as a college teaching. We bestow the Charles Sheedy Teaching Award, the most important teaching award in the college, the only college-wide teaching award on one faculty member. It's named after Father Sheedy, who was Dean of the College of Arts and Letters for 18 years, beginning in the 1950s up until the early 1970s, and who was a legendary teacher himself. So with an illustrious list of faculty who won this award, and their speeches every year, which again is one of the high points of the year, are on our website. Before we begin the formal program, I do want to do one introduction. This year's winner, it's no surprise to you, is Marisel Moreno from our Department of Romance Languages. And she is joined here by her husband, Tom Anderson, one of her colleagues in Romance Languages, and her children, Mariana and Gabe. Let's give them a warm welcome. And now to the big show. To introduce Marisel Moreno is John Sitter. John Sitter won the Sheedy Award in 2014. He's a longtime faculty member at Notre Dame after a career at Emory University before that, and a BA at Harvard and a PhD at Minnesota. He's one of the country's leading scholars of 18th century British literature and poetry, and he's one of our college's great teachers on not only British poetry in the 18th century, but environmental issues and sustainability. And many of you will remember his passionate 2014 Sheedy address. I give you John Sitter, who will introduce Marisel Moreno. John.
Good afternoon, all. This will be a brief introduction. Marisel said she plans to speak for 90 minutes or so, so I'll keep it brief. It's a pleasurable honor to introduce today the winner of the Sheedy Award for Excellence in Teaching, Marisel Moreno. Marcel and all of you will understand when I say that it's an honor and a pleasure I would prefer not to have, wishing instead that it could have been enjoyed by its rightful recipient, the winner of last year's award, Robert Sedlak of the Department of Art History and Design. Marcel began teaching in the Department of Romance Languages and Literatures 18 years ago in 1998. For her first several years, she taught part-time while finishing her dissertation from Georgetown on writing Puerto Rico, the literature of insular and U.S. Puerto Rican women authors. In 2007, she became a full-time assistant professor, and since 2013, associate professor. Her major publications include a 2012 book from the University of Virginia, Family Matters, Puerto Rican Women Authors on the Island and the Mainland, and more than a dozen journal articles, most recently, The Untold Midwestern Puerto Rican Story in Studies in American Fiction, and Swimming in Olive Oil, North African and Hispanic Caribbean in the poetry of Victor Hernandez Cruz in the Hispanic Review. She's working on a second book called Undocumented Migration in the Hispanic Caribbean, Insular and Diaspora Literary Perspectives. As you will gather from these titles, Marcel is a key part of the Notre Dame Spanish program's growing strength in Latin American literature and culture. Important and timely as her scholarly publications are, it is Marcel's contributions as a teacher that we honor this afternoon. Her many courses, from first-year seminars to advanced offerings, focus on Latina literature and culture, especially Caribbean, but also Central and South American literature, with particular interest in gender and migration, and in recent years, community-based service learning. Such is the busyness of campus life that no doubt many of you have had the experience of traveling to a national or international conference where you run into a Notre Dame colleague and find that you finally have time to talk more than you did over the past year back home. Marcel is my next-door neighbor in DCO. Our office doors are 6 feet apart. But while I often see her, usually with many students waiting to confer, the happy circumstances of this award allowed us our longest conversation to date quite recently, during which the profound concern and commitment to teaching that her colleagues and her students remark upon were mine to experience directly. One colleague, speaking of the transformative effect Marisel's community-based learning course has on her students, regards her as a, quote, wonderful teacher and a model for others in the profession. A second concludes that Marisel Moreno educates her students in mind and heart. Students seem to see it that way, quite generally. One remarks that she is undoubtedly what every teacher should aspire to be, preoccupied with making you both a more knowledgeable and better person. Another recently graduated recalls her passion, her creativity, and her unceasing desire to empower students and her community. I know that Marcel, in speaking of her work, will have much to tell us today about the broader meanings of community. So I'll simply conclude by saying how happy, how lucky, how honored we are that she is part of ours. Please welcome the 2016 Sheedy Excellence in Teaching Award recipient, Professor Marisel Moreno.
Thank you, John, for such a wonderful introduction. Today, we miss and remember our colleague, Robert Sedlak. which we wish he could be here with us today. And we continue to pray for him and his family. I want to thank the College of Arts and Letters for honoring me with this amazing award, the Department of Romance Languages and Literatures for its unconditional support through my career here at Notre Dame. I want to thank my colleagues at the Center for Social Concerns. It's been an honor working with you. And special thanks to Rachel Parroquin, who has done everything possible to see our CBL program grow and succeed. I thank the Institute for Latino Studies and the Kellogg Institute for all of their encouragement, La Casa de Amistad for being an exemplary community partner, and last but not least, my family, Tom Anderson for being the best husband and chair. I couldn't have done this without you, and my children, Gabriel and Mariana, for always being my inspiration. I am deeply grateful for all of you. Well, everyone knows that this award that I simply cannot pronounce well, it will sound like something else. Everyone knows that this award carries a significant prize. I'm expected to share some intelligent remarks with you. Colleagues who I deeply admire, students who have heard enough from me, and friends and family who love me enough to join me at this larger than usual faculty meeting. This is your chance to find the nearest exit. I will not be, I can take it, it's fine. But for those who are willing to listen, please allow me to share with you a few words. It's such an incredible honor to be standing here in front of you, being recognized for my teaching and the work I've done to integrate the study of US Latino literature and community-based learning. I know that I'm extremely lucky to be part of a university that values and advances both Latino studies and community engagement. The strides we've made as an institution in these areas have made an indelible impact thus far. I can't think of a more crucial moment for Notre Dame to continue its leadership role and provide a model for other colleges and universities to follow. Latino studies seems more important than ever, and the connection with our Latino communities has never been greater. I do not take for granted the support that Notre Dame has given me because I've seen how Latino studies, like other minority studies, is often relegated to the margins. Don't get me wrong, the field has made great strides in the last decades, but as recent events have made clear, we are still facing many obstacles. Most of these are the products of stereotypes, fear, misinformation, and misunderstanding. One particular issue that concerns me is that of invisibility, which I see reflected in a range of areas. Perhaps one of the most extreme examples of this is House Bill 2281, the infamous ethnic studies ban, which passed in Arizona in 2010, and which, with one swift stroke of a pen, effectively eliminated Mexican-American studies programs from Tucson area schools. This happened despite the fact that the program had been shown to improve student outcomes and graduation rates among minority and at-risk students. HB 2281 sought to prohibit courses or classes that, and I quote, promote the overthrow of the United States government, promote resentment toward a race or class of people, are designed primarily for pupils of a particular ethnic group, and advocate ethnic solidarity instead of the treatment of pupils as individuals, end of quote. Many have denounced this controversial law, including the Modern Languages Association, which in a 2012 statement referred to it as a quote-unquote attack on Mexican-American citizens and cultures. Latino studies scholars know that the elimination of this program meant much more than an attack on Mexican-American culture and history. We watched, astonished, as canonical U.S. Latino literary works were prohibited in the classrooms. Literary classics by Chicano authors, Rodolfo Anaya, Sandra Cisneros, Tomás Rivera, Dominican-American author Junot Díaz, and Puerto Rican poet Martín Espada, among dozens of others, were in effect physically removed from classrooms and carted away to storage facilities. For academics like me, who have taught and studied the very literature targeted by HB 2281, words can hardly convey the sense of loss that these events generated. It's hard to understand how the law can be used to try to erase a culture or the memory of a people. But many have fought against the ban, especially a number of the young students who had seen incredible academic gains after discovering a literature that they could claim as their own. By studying those works, they had been able to see themselves in the broader narrative of this nation. Armed with a new sense of self-esteem, they had begun to dream about the possibility of truly playing a role in the betterment of our society. We can learn a lot from what transpired in Arizona. Even if the ban does not affect us directly, it speaks volumes about the perceived role, or lack thereof, that Latino literature and culture play in the broader US society. Based on my own students' reactions every semester, I'm aware that, generally speaking, this material is not being taught at our middle schools and high schools. In the best case scenario, a few students in my classes are able to explain the difference between Latino and Latin American literature when I ask them at the beginning of the semester. Sometimes one or two have read a work by Sandra Cisneros or perhaps Julia Alvarez. In terms of historical figures, they tend to recognize the name Cesar Chavez, but they confess not having learned much about him. The Chicano movement, usually news to them. They thought the civil rights movement was only about issues affecting African Americans. I can give you a long list of examples, but the bottom line is that every semester I am reminded of the gaps and silences in my students' educations. And I ask myself, can silence also work as a symbolic ban? When we deny Latino children and youth of their chance to see their own stories reflected in books, we deny them the right to see themselves as integral to the fabric of this nation. When we don't implement a curriculum from preschool through college that includes diverse voices and alternate histories, all of our children, not just those who are Latino or minorities, suffer the consequences of not seeing and understanding the complex textures of our diverse society. This is how a nation begins to build its own internal walls. Today, we are experiencing the results of this literary and historical whitewashing. But we are also witnessing a push against these erasures in the works of many Latino authors who are rewriting history and the narrative of this country. Take, for instance, the work of Latino children author Duncan Tonatiuh, whose book, Separate is Never Equal, tells the lesser-known story of Mexican-Puerto Rican child, Sylvia Mendez, whose family fought to end school segregation in a case that preceded the landmark Brown versus Board of Education by 7 years. Or consider the poem titled Purifying America's Textbooks of Ethnic Studies by Cuban-American poet Dan Vera, which he wrote as a response to HB 2281. In this poem, the poetic voice considers what might have happened if key Cuban figures had not provided their support during the American Revolution, as the following stanza illustrates, and I quote, "Hearing the commotion, Francisco de Saavedra de Sangronis has stirred in his Andalusian grave, demanding that while you're purifying the record, you return the $500,000 in silver that he collected in 24 hours to fund your great final victory in Yorktown. End of quote. And speaking about the American Revolution, let's not forget that the cultural phenomenon that is Hamilton is the brainchild of US Puerto Rican Lin-Manuel Miranda, and as such, a work of Puerto Rican, Latino, and American literatures all at once. So, when we ask ourselves what we can do as a nation to heal our divisions and to build a stronger, more inclusive society, let's not forget the power of literature to pave the way. It all begins with stories. The problem is that we don't listen to certain voices. There's not a lack of authors and poets. There's a lack of readers. There's also not a lack of Latino and other minority historical figures, actors, people who helped build this nation from its inception. But sometimes there's a lack of willingness to integrate them into the dominant historical narrative. In a way, we have normalized the exclusion of minority voices from this country's narrative. And as a result, the task for those of us who teach US Latino and other minority literatures can be as frustrating as it is rewarding. When my students lament not having learned more about US Latinos or Latinas during high school, I remind them that they didn't have much control over the curriculum. But I also tell them that now that they're in college, it is their responsibility to make up for that lost time by listening to those stories that have remained absent from their US literature and history books. I tell them this because as a literature professor, I'm convinced that without sound historical background, my students' understanding of the literature would be compromised. How can they understand the foundational Chicano poem, I Am Joaquin, without being exposed to the other side of the story about the Mexican-American War? How can they understand the works of Tomás Rivera without knowing about the Chicano civil rights movement? How can they understand, Piri Thomas, Down These Mean Streets, or Martínez Padas's piercing poetry without knowing about Puerto Rican history? How can the poetry of William Archila make sense to them if they're not familiar with the history of the Salvadoran Civil War? What students discover is that, unlike what many of them have been led to believe, that is, that Latin American and US histories stand alone and independent of one another, the truth is that the stories of these regions are deeply intertwined. Gaining a balanced perspective of the history of US-Latin American relations is the first step toward understanding the presence in this country of the highly heterogeneous group that we call Latinos and Latinas, and which includes people of so many races, ethnicities, languages, religions, and cultural backgrounds. Armed with the perspective that only historical knowledge can add to the study of literary works, students begin to see the value of US Latino literature. More importantly, I see how they begin to claim that minority literature as part of their broader cultural heritage, regardless of their own backgrounds. I have seen how they thrive learning about and finding connections with groups that at the beginning of the semester many perceived to be unfamiliar and even foreign. That's the power of literature. It provides a space that allows us to discuss delicate and important topics, and it allows us to connect with one another. Listening to Latino stories through the story of narrative, poetry, and theater becomes a powerful act of community building. Books are bridges. We depend on them in order to cross cultural borders. And yet, as important as this is, we all know that a holistic education depends not only on what we learn from books, but also on what we learn from experience. As physician and educator Maria Montessori once said, and I quote, "Education is a natural process carried out by the human individual and is acquired not by listening to words, but by experiences in the environment." End of quote. One of the main reasons why I felt compelled to integrate community-based learning, or CBL for short, into my US Latino literature courses was for this reason. I wanted my students to experience literature coming alive and to understand its power to foster social change. And let me pause here for a second to just briefly explain CBL, which refers to a pedagogy that combines community engagement with structured learning in the classroom, and is based on reciprocity between students and community partners. So students are not expected to go save anyone at the organization they're working at, but rather to share their expertise, but mostly learn from those experiences. So in addition to its potential to encourage a deeper appreciation for literature, I felt that student engagement with the local Latino community would allow my students, who are mostly non-Latino, as you well know, to learn from and about this population, and to connect with this group in ways that literature also tends to promote. Although teaching U.S. Latino letters has proven fulfilling throughout my career, I had always been aware of the significant social and cultural distance between most of my students and the material I teach. Therefore, I thought that one way to bridge that gap could be through CBL, and the opportunity it would afford my students to experience a weekly mini immersion in the local Latino community. Personal interactions, I believe, have the potential to open the eyes of my students to the issues and challenges affecting the local and national Latino community. Because of the demographic profile of most of my students, I came to see CBL as the missing link in my courses. After 11 consecutive semesters, except for my year on leave, of teaching upper-level U.S. Latino literature with a CBL component and with over 4,500 hours of student engagement with the local Latino community, I am convinced that in the majority of cases, this pedagogical approach leads to a more profound student learning and a deeper sense of civic engagement. This is because CBL links the theoretical knowledge gained in the classroom with real-life experiences rooted in the community. In this sense, it is an instructional methodology that provides us with ways to bridge the town-gown divide, and in the process, often inspires students to become civically engaged and committed to social transformation. My own experiences have shown that bringing students into the community within the context of rigorous academic coursework often produces deeper learning outcomes. Through tutoring and mentoring children at La Casa de Amistad, a local organization that serves the Latino community through a range of programs that promote education and literacy, many students begin to see the bigger picture and find common ground with children with whom they never thought they could share anything in common. A significant number of my students have gained a deeper understanding of the complexities and challenges of growing up as a Latino and a minority in this country. This understanding, in turn, fosters empathy, and perhaps more importantly, many become aware of their own privilege while confronting and challenging the stereotypes that society tends to perpetuate about Latinos. This is how social transformation takes place, one student at a time. The world is our classroom. While students may memorize definitions for immigration, transculturation, racism, poverty, bilingualism, etc., such knowledge pales in comparison to the ability to understand these concepts after consistent interaction with the local Latino community. These words gain a much deeper meaning because the concepts become personalized. Many students in my classes come to realize that an immigrant is not just a statistic or an abstract figure at the center of today's political debates, but rather the little boy they have been helping all semester with his math homework, someone they see struggling with English, eager to learn to earn good grades in order to be a doctor someday. All of a sudden, undocumented immigrant ceases to be a dangerous and criminalized figure, but rather the sweet and soft-spoken mother of the siblings they have been mentoring, someone they come to admire after learning of the risk she took fleeing inconceivable violence in order to give her children a chance at life. In the end, it's about listening to, connecting with, and humanizing those who have become dehumanized in today's society. Dialogue is key, and so is being willing to hear other people's stories. When students learn from those who are typically invisible or marginalized, they are more likely to recognize the interconnections that bind us all as humans, as well as to respect our differences. Once we begin to cultivate solidarity, understanding, empathy, and tolerance, we are opening the doors to a more peaceful and inclusive future. Experience and human interaction are crucial both to learning and to producing social transformation. However, in academia, it's easy to lose sight of this truth and ignore the potential that we have to foster positive social change by connecting our academics to the world around us. For years, I've been hearing my students say how glad they are that my CBL course has pushed them to break away from what they call the Notre Dame bubble. It's easy to remain secluded in our ivory tower, living under the illusion that our work exists in a vacuum. I try to remind myself and my students that we have much to gain by trying to link our intellectual pursuits with the needs of the underprivileged communities around us. I urge them to consider how what they do or will do in the future can have a direct impact on society. I encourage them to be open to breaking the mold, to take risks, and to get out of their comfort zones. All of this they usually accomplish through the work they do at La Casa de Amistad, and I remind them that in doing so, they are choosing to be bridges. As a society, we're experiencing unprecedented levels of divisiveness, intolerance, and hatred. This is why we can no longer afford to remain complacent within the four walls of the classroom. The stakes are simply too high. I've been lucky enough to witness incredible growth in my students throughout the years, a growth that is the product of the literature they've read and their experiences at La Casa de Amistad. Allow me to share with you a few of their comments from final reflections. Going to La Casa helped me to become aware of the regional population outside the Notre Dame bubble, especially regarding the struggles immigrants face from language barriers and education to socioeconomic issues. I learned a lot about my personal biases as a result of the CBL component. Realizing these assumptions that I have, and then meeting real people with real problems while learning about the overarching context led me to change my opinion on several issues concerning the education system, undocumented migration, and racial tensions here in South Bend. Another student says, I now have a clearer picture of what being an immigrant in this country can mean, and I've developed awareness and gratitude for the privileges I've had. Yet another one says, as we talked about in class, working with the children of today is an investment in the future of America, a future that gets brighter when children of all races and ethnicities are all given equal opportunities. Programs like La Casa do just that by trying to give the best possible experience and support to the Latino community of South Bend. La Casa makes a tremendous difference in the lives of these children every day. I am lucky to have been able to be part of something so inspiring and special and want to continue service such as this in the future. And finally, one more quote. If more people could study this literature and get to know kids like those at La Casa, there would be more peace and understanding in this world. My students' words have stayed with me over the years and have been an important reminder of what's really at stake. And it is much more than simply mastering literary analysis. I want my students to learn from the literature and engage with the community that has produced it. This is how we begin to break down the walls produced by racial, ethnic, national, class, gender, citizenship status, and religious differences. As new generations begin to appreciate diversity and see it as the gift that it is, those values will transform society into a more inclusive place. Because I have seen firsthand the transformative power of U.S. Latino literature and CBL, I can't imagine teaching this literature without the help of our community. It's ironic to think that a minor literature that has remained marginal to both the US and Latin American canons can be such a powerful tool to promote social justice and positive change. But I see it happen every semester. Books are bridges, and we can be bridges too. Thank you.
Bravo. Congratulations. Come on down. Marcel, over here. I'll take that. So we typically give a present at this moment to our colleague who's won the Sheedy Award. I have here a plaque. You need not open this box now. It's kind of what you'd expect. Okay. I have here a check. Don't lose that.
I did not know there was a check.
There is a check, and we have a present. We'd like you to open this now.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Hopefully this won't take long so you can go get your drinks. Having a little bit of a hard time, huh? Can I rip it?
No?
Will I be judged?
Mm-hmm. Oh, my goodness. Can you open it on the top? There you go. Okay, good.
I'll get that later. There's a copy of the if you don't want to.
So you might not want to open the bottom, but you can open
This part?
don't open that.
Don't open that. Open this.
Well, actually, you know what? We can take it.
So take this off.
You're testing me to see if I can follow directions, right?
There we go.
There we go. There it is.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Unbelievable.
Oh my gosh, this is wonderful, Ramiro.
So we were told that by a very reliable source that one of Maricel's favorite artists is Ramiro Rodriguez, who does a series of prints called Caritas, Love, the Immigrant in the World. And so these are some original prints.
Oh my gosh.
Bravo. Yeah. Thanks to everyone for attending this reception. We know well in the Dean's office that the most important work in the college goes on not in our office, but in the classrooms, the labs, the auditoriums, the theaters, where you do your research and you work with our students. We're very grateful for that and know that we wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy Holiday. Congratulations again to Marisel. I wish you all the best for the end of the semester, and now please enjoy the reception in the atrium.